at the Episcopal Church Foundation. What is the Episcopal Church Foundation and why are we here? We are a 501c3, a separate nonprofit from the Episcopal Church Center, and our mission is that we seek to strengthen the leadership and financial capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and communities of faith in order to pursue their mission and ministry. Essentially, we seek to empower parishes and organizations in the Episcopal Church to live more fully into their mission, looking at both the financial and the leadership resources, and quite often these two realms are very much connected. We have online tools and resources that are available on our web page. We also have vital practices and vital posts. If you're on Facebook, I'd highly recommend looking forward. I'm going to take one moment. There we go. Thanks, Terry. It allows us to push materials forward, and then you are able to read them as soon as they come out. So if you are on Facebook, I'd highly recommend finding us. This evening, what are we hoping to cover? Well, this looks like a very stressed out young man. Hopefully you are not in this position. Tonight, we will talk a quick theology of volunteerism. Why is it that we do what we do, besides that we have to do it? What is the principle and the foundation that undergirds our actions? We're also going to talk a little bit about the landscape of nonprofit volunteering. It's important for you to understand the context with which you are seeking to recruit and plan for volunteers. The role of impact on recruitment. Finally, or actually two, how to effectively plan for volunteers, and finally, successful recruitment practices. But first, a poll. And Terry, if you could push the poll forward, that would be wonderful. Thank you. This isn't the interactive part of the webinar. What I'd like to know is, it's completely anonymous, by the way. I can see the number of people who respond, but not what you say. If you were to answer the following, which would you choose? I really love my parish. My parish is A-okay. I'm not really much of a churchgoer. Or, are you kidding? I'm only there because of my spouse and kids. Or, as I will talk about later, my dog. Right, we have some, oh wow, quick responders. Well done. Wonderful. Harry, you were not kidding. This is quite the group. So, the results are in, and 95% say of this group, I really love my church. Well, obviously this was meant to be humorous and to point out what people seem to forget about at stewardship or annual giving time, that people love their church and they want to help. So recruiting a committee to gather support for your parish is only hard if you focus on the things that scare people or put them off. Yeah, I'm talking about money. So we're here tonight to show you a little bit about how this works. So, the novelist and theologian Frederick Buechner, many of you may have heard of him, says that vocation or calling is that place where the world's great need and your deep hunger meet. It just so happens that the most effective path to recruiting an A stewardship team is also good theology. Tonight, we're going to show you exactly how to do just that by calling forth your parishioner or your community members' talents, skills, and passions. So, this, I have to tell you, is my favorite slide. What does Justin Timberlake have to do at all with volunteering? Now, I am not a Justin Timberlake fan, but he has a song out that says, it's like you're my mirror staring back at me. I couldn't get any bigger without anyone else beside me. Currently, in terms of the landscape of nonprofit volunteering is at a 10-year low. The volunteer rate declined by 1.1 percentage points to 25.4% for the year, as was reported in April 13th, so not even 6 weeks ago, by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it's pretty current data. Now, some will be fast to say, well, this is purely the economy's fault. And they wouldn't be wrong. Essentially, what we're seeing is the reflection of the economy is having an impact on our volunteerism. But what we need to realize is that
you're my mirror.
The economy is a reflection, but that there is also more involved. If the economy is down, fundraising and volunteering will likely be down, but for another notable reason. Why is this? Won't people have more time to invest their resources if they are unemployed? One would think that, right? Well, the truth is the largest majority of volunteers tend to be, on the whole, statistics show, well-educated, employed, parents in their 30s and early 40s. You are more likely to volunteer if you are employed than if you aren't. And the data shows that states with higher rates of unemployment tend to actually have lower rates of volunteering. So despite the evidence and the wishful narrative that volunteering might somehow be a silver lining of a bad economy, there remains strong. The silver lining remains strong because there's this mistaken notion that the most important thing separating volunteers from non-volunteers is free time. We often think, the people in our parish, they're just so busy. They lack the free time. If only they had more, perhaps they would volunteer more. I'm here to tell you tonight, this is not the primary cause for lack of volunteerism. So, what is? A 2011 report commissioned by the Career Advisory Board and conducted by the Harris Interactive found that the number one factor for young adults ages 21 to 31 who wanted a successful career was a sense of meaning. Though their managers, according to the study, continue to think that millennials are primarily motivated by money, nearly 3/4 of young adults surveyed said that meaningful work was among the 3 most important factors defining career success. Now that's just millennials. What about other generations? A New York Times article from November 2013, just a few months ago, states when individuals adopt what we call a meaning mindset, that is, they seek connections, give to others, orient themselves to a larger purpose, clear benefits can result, including improved psychological well-being, more creativity, enhanced worker performance. Workers who find their jobs meaningful are more engaged and less likely to leave their current positions. The same is true for volunteers. This has very serious implications for recruiting for fundraising. There we go. So before you do anything, one of the first things you need to determine is, for yourself, utilizing a theology of giving, why is stewardship as a ministry important to your parish? What is the impact? Now, I'm going to give you a hint. The impact is never the amount to be raised. I wonder how many of you were quick to say, because we need the money. The impact is never the amount to be raised. Instead, how is that money being used for the kingdom of God? How is this money being used in your organization? Why is your ministry important? These are some very powerful questions to ask. Once you've been able to ask, why is your ministry important, and separate the internal drive, the impact from money, we are then also able to ask, whose lives will be touched by the work of volunteers? And is there potential for transformation? Because I want to believe that that's why many of us are at parishes, is that we are seeking to invite others along with us in the process of transformation. So truly, when we are able to say, please join me in volunteering for this important ministry. What you are about to do has extremely there's an extremely large opportunity for impact in my parish because X will be impacted, because this ministry needs our support, because I have seen this. Not only are you modeling for them how they can go about inviting others to donate, but then you are providing them with a reason why they should volunteer besides a feeling of obligation. Now, before you start recruiting, you actually need to have a stewardship plan. There are tons of options out there. In fact, before this webinar, Terry and I started listing off all of the different plans, and it was almost overwhelming. You can do any type of model, and many models are dependent upon your volunteer base. So I thought I would look at one plan that tended to be utilized by many of the parishes that we work with, this new model, New Consecration Sunday. I am not promoting this as the model for an actual stewardship plan, but I am using it as an example to see how many different volunteer positions there are. The advantage of a package like this is that you are able to customize it. However, if you do want to look at other models, please do let us know. Nearly all programs do have the following components, though. There's a gathering, there's individual contact, which I hope goes well above a letter, calls, visits, groups, meetings. There's storytelling or testimonial. There's the incorporation of meditation or Bible study or prayer. Communication is of vital importance. Bulletin, announcements, letters, narrative budgets, e-news, posters, skits. Highly would recommend as well items of fun like videos, etc. These are all components of a plan. What you want to look at then is, as you can see here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different volunteers that have opportunities for involvement. And oftentimes we get into the thinking of that one person needs to serve all of the different jobs, or only one person would be able to. This is a great opportunity for you to start looking at who has a variety of different skills and perhaps passions in your parish. And with that, I want to suggest then thinking about looking at what skills and passions will make your plan really sing. What will move it from a basic plan to being contextually appropriate? Not all plans are going to fit your parish, and we recognize that. But if it's going to have the maximum amount of impact, what are the skills that are already found in your parish that you can hone in on, whether it be communication? Some parishes that have some very gifted leaders and hospitality. I work with a lot of parishes that know how to throw parties. So what's this hospitality and spiritual theological grounding and organization? Now at this time, I'm going to ask Terry to join me again and talk to us a bit about seeking out volunteers based on their talents as well as passions.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Thank you, Erin, for allowing me a little segment in your webinar. Erin has just outlined for you quite a list of volunteers, and especially if you're in a relatively small congregation, or on the other end of the spectrum, if you're in a really large congregation where it's hard to meet people, that can be a little bit daunting. You can say, well, that's great. Where am I going to find all these people? So here are some places that you can start. Many congregations have a time and talent fair. I showed you how to use that little hand-raising operation. If you'd like to raise your hand, see whether to indicate if your congregation has a time and talent fair, or you can type it in the chat. We've got one person, 2 people with raised hands. Other people seem to be typing in the chat. One of the interesting things about a time and talent fair, and I'll circle back to this, is I've seen a lot of congregations who focus on the committees that they need to fill or the jobs that they want done. You might start thinking about your time and talent fairs from the perspective of the people with the talents and the time. What would they most be interested in doing? Where do their passions lie? And we're going to talk a little bit about how you identify that in a minute in a more sort of quantified way. But one very easy way to identify that is start paying attention. Who is the first in and last out in the kitchen during every church supper? This is likely your party person. Who takes all the kids for a play date after church service or has all the kids piled in with their kids in the pew on Sunday morning? That's a natural person for working with the youth or young adult program. Then who is that person? And this person tends to get a bad rap in congregations sometimes, but who's the person who always knows the latest news, who always knows the latest gossip? You know you have one. We, in my congregation, we used to say that, you know, there's 6 degrees of separation unless you know Nancy, and then there are only 3. So that person is a prime person to put on your communications committee. They know everybody. They know what's going on. Have them on the inside. So look around and start thinking about people in terms of what are their gifts and how can those gifts be used in the particular plan that you've got involved, that you're building. Then go ask them. Say, we're building a team to do X, Y, Z, and we need people who love to post, write, design e-newsletters, do computer things, take video, whatever. And I noticed that you seem really good at these things. I'd like you to help us out. I think you could really make a difference. I noticed that when we manage capital campaigns, people say to us, oh, I'll do anything but ask for money. And the really good news here is that you can build an A stewardship team the same way, because the least important thing that you will do on your stewardship team is ask for money. It's much more about hospitality and stories and invitations than about asking for money. Now, I promised I would circle back to the passions and talent. This is a time and talent sign-up sheet from Holy Cross Church in Carlsbad, California. It's a little tiny storefront church, and I couldn't enlarge it much more, so it's hard to see, but you will get a PDF. You should already have gotten a PDF of these slides. What you see here is a list of activities that people might do: arranging flowers, caring for babies and toddlers, introducing people to each other, leading meetings. You know, everybody's got an alpha dog in their congregation. And then the person has options to check. This is something I love to do. This is something I will do if I need to. And this is something I would like to learn. This third category is really important in terms of bringing along your next generation of volunteers. Think about who might be interested in learning to do some of these things and pair them with someone who's already experienced and bring along mentors. And I believe Erin's going to be talking about the importance of mentoring later on when we get to millennials. So you've found all these people, you've had a great time and talent fair, and you've got all these people who would love to plan a meeting, organize files, throw parties, whatever it is you need. Before you go out and recruit, there's still a few things you need to do. The most important part of volunteer management actually happens before you recruit the volunteers. You want to respect their time and their commitment, and the best way to do this is to give them a job description. It's surprising how few volunteer roles actually come with a written description of what's expected. And part of that's because people feel like they need to outline what the person has to do. But a good job description really only needs three things. You want to outline the responsibilities, and I'm going to talk about the difference between responsibilities and tasks in a minute. You want to outline participation. Will they be expected to show up for things? How often? How many times a week? How long? Do they just show up or do they run the show? That kind of thing. And then you want to show them where to go for guidance and support. Give them a contact number so that if they're unsure, they know who to call on for help. Now, the difference between responsibilities and tasks is something that I see played out in key ways in churches frequently, although the classic area is in the altar guild. The altar guild is always saying, we don't have new young people coming on board, and as soon as somebody says, well, gee, it looks kind of scary, all those things you have to do this way and that way, but they screw up their courage and join the altar guild, and the first thing that happens is somebody says, oh, we don't do it that way here. The difference between responsibilities and tasks is focusing on what you want the volunteer to accomplish and then letting them figure out how they will accomplish it. If you want to have 7 parties, let them decide when and where and what time those parties will occur. They just need to be responsible for organizing the party. So focus on responsibilities and let their creativity take over on tasks. And then focus on the tools that they will need. If you think that they need some overview, you're just introducing them to the concept of your stewardship program. There are great packaged stewardship programs, as Erin mentioned. ECF has a number of webinars on stewardship, and we also host the 10 webinars on good stewardship. You can get all those, by the way. They're free recordings archived at ecfvp.org, Vital Practices. So that's a 1-hour recording that somebody can watch and get a good overview. For communications, the kinds of tools you might need would be a list of deadlines and publications when they come out. For hospitality, a list of tools might be the budget, their sources for invitations. You want to gather these tools, put them with the job descriptions beforehand, or at least make a list of the tools and commit to your volunteer that you will help them find those tools. You also want to make sure that you build in some wiggle room at this point, because if you are going to allow your volunteers to implement their responsibilities in their own way, they're going to come up with new things. So you may need to build in a little more staff time if you're here representing the church staff. They may come back and say, can we do X, Y, or Z? Build in a little more time so that late-breaking ideas can be included. This, as I said, is one of my pet subjects, and so we do have an entire webinar devoted to working with volunteers, and you can find that archived on Vital Practices along with many other useful webinars. I've put the address up here for you. If you want to go into more detail, I suggest you listen to that webinar. Finally, you've got all the tools that you need. You've got the job description. You've identified your volunteers. This is the way you recruit them. Nothing builds support and commitment like a leader coming around to say, I want you, not just some warm body. You want to call them up and make an appointment to see them in person. This is a hard thing to do for busy people. Promise them it'll take 15 to 20 minutes max. But the reason to do this is that a face-to-face visit is 20 to 40% more effective than a phone call or a letter. So go see them, list their skills, and list their passions, what you see in them that will make them a good volunteer, and say, I want you to be a part of this. I think you'll make a difference. Then be willing to listen. And Erin's going to talk about this a little more down the road, but in my own volunteer management, I've tried to recruit people for jobs that I thought they would be wonderful for, only to get these big surprises. I worked with a foster home in Tijuana, Mexico during the well-publicized drug wars down there. And I needed to recruit both someone to run the fundraising committee and someone to lead monthly trips down to the foster home to play with the children. And I thought no one was going to be willing to do that during the drug wars when the newspapers in San Diego were running pictures of gang violence and messages left on the main boulevard. But in fact, when I went to ask the woman I'd pegged to run the development committee, she was a suburban mom with a teenage daughter and aging parents she was taking care of, and she said, actually, I'd like to be the trip leader, because her teenage daughter spoke Spanish, and they made it a mother-daughter activity to go down to Mexico once a week and play with these children. And the daughter had been so moved by the children's needs that she felt that she really wanted to participate, and her mother did this with her. It was a very moving experience, and it taught me a lot about when to ask and when to accommodate a volunteer's passion. So Erin has a little bit more to say about that. I'm going to turn it.
There's another component to this as well. I want you to be a part of us, be a part of a team with us. There's an invitation of not pushing, not shaming, but inviting people to be a part of something collectively that you are working for a common goal. Remember that you are working to support a meaningful and a rewarding cause. And so you feel good about the work you're doing, and you want to share that joy of giving back to others. But remember that when you approach your volunteers, that you're inviting them. You'll have more success recruiting volunteers by framing it in the language of invitation rather than, well, we don't have anybody, and if you don't join, we won't be successful. Terry did a brilliant job talking about identifying and articulating specific strengths, and perhaps in the invitation naming those strengths specifically. You'll have a lot better response rate through that process. Now, let's talk a bit about the invitation. So first, paint a full picture. What is the need when you provide your invitation? Is there a problem? And the solution, how will this job help to solve it? Fears. Often people have the fear of, will I be capable of helping with that? It's very helpful when you go to a person with that well-articulated job description in hand that you're able to talk about those expectations. Oftentimes, a volunteer can make a commitment once they've been able to talk through what their fears are. Benefits. This is something that we don't talk a lot about in the church. What's in it for me? I mentioned earlier transformation. One of the experiences that I've had along the way is that oftentimes parishes, we take sort of a, well, this is my responsibility. There shouldn't be any benefit in it for me. But yet, in any other type of nonprofit volunteering experience, this is very much a common part of the language. We talk about how folks will develop and hone new skills. We talk about experiences that feed our passion and enrich our lives. We talk about ways in which we see the world anew. And these are some benefits that can be communicated as well about fundraising, especially if you focus on impact rather than the dollar. One way to cover all of this is to imagine you're directing a motion picture. So think about for a moment, you're Steven Spielberg. Your goal here is to get the prospective volunteer to view the movie in their head too. Seeing the problem you're trying to solve, the difficulties it creates, and the ways that volunteers are involved. In essence, you want that prospective volunteer, here's the piece, you want that prospective volunteer to picture themselves as the star of the movie. Hopefully with their own picture and not Angelina Jolie or Brad Pitt starring. You want them to own their gifts and abilities. Now, oftentimes people are going to have different motives for volunteerism. The millennial generation, for example, is oftentimes talked about as the selfie generation. Now, for those of you who may not know what a selfie is, a selfie are those pictures that people can take on their iPhone or their smartphone of themselves. You can turn the camera around to face yourself and take the picture. Once again, returning to that Justin Timberlake reflection piece. What is interesting about the selfie generation, however, that Pew has found is that this generation actually has very similar giving characteristics and volunteering characteristics as Peter Jennings titled Greatest Generation. The millennial generation already has a good amount of social volunteerism built into public schools, into private engagements. Oftentimes, young adults are not allowed to graduate from high school without securing so many hours of volunteering at social services. This is actually a common expectation on college applications. This is not necessarily a threat to us. Actually, this is an opportunity for us to engage millennials who are seeking opportunities to grow and allow them to use their gifts and skills for some of the jobs that we have. But as Terry mentioned, that might require some mentoring, and it might also require some extra staff time and extra space to allow that millennial to work out exactly how to solve a problem differently or in a different way. Millennials also are very important because they seek out immediate, not gratification, but response for their work. And this is one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about with volunteerism. One of the things that we do with fundraising that we focus on is how do we thank donors throughout the year. In fact, the United Way has a rule of thumb that we need to thank donors up to 7 times. What are the different ways that we can thank volunteers as well that are serving on your committee? That millennial is going to need a response very quickly in order to remain engaged. I like to tell this story of a millennial that I worked with at a parish in Hawaii. And this millennial very much had a love of dogs and cats. And we were doing a capital campaign there. And this millennial knew that others loved dogs and cats as well. Now, this person was not very much connected to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that were being raised. However, she knew that her dog was well loved by the priest. And so because of that, she had this relationship. And it was through this passion that she became connected in a very interesting way to the capital campaign. And she started to connect other dogs and cats lovers. And so before you knew it, not only did we have volunteers that were very much interested in a very particular passion engaged in fundraising, but we actually had 3 dogs and cats actually pledged to the campaign itself. It was a fun experience. This is a great example of looking at what are people's passions and abilities and applying them in ways that can be meaningful, even if it strikes you as a bit funny in the moment. So, how to engage millennials, and oftentimes some of these characteristics are similar for Generation Xers, because yes, it can and should be done. First and foremost, millennials know volunteering is good for them. They have experience. It helps to relieve stress, and it's actually been proven that volunteerism is linked to a happier attitude. Another way to motivate millennials is the idea of promoting change. We heard a lot about that in the past, both in their church and in their life. Again, we can appeal to impact into changing interests. Millennials can try their hand at a variety of fundraising activities and find out exactly what they like most, and hopefully in a safe environment where a mentor is willing to encourage them. So what is necessary in order to recruit and keep volunteers for fundraising? Well, it's important to be flexible. As Terry mentioned, she had a volunteer, Suzanne, who was on a development committee, that she wanted to recruit for a development committee. However, Terry showed great amount of flexibility in allowing Suzanne to seek out her own passions. Now, since then, what I don't recall Terry saying that I think is important to note is that Suzanne's nearly doubled the number of people making trips to Dorcas House. And she's made Dorcas House a focal ministry of her parish. And the line item gift from that parish is actually $500 higher than the line item contribution from a local cathedral. So she's probably done more for fundraising by leading trips than if she'd ever taken over a committee. Being flexible and listening to your volunteers' passions and then adapting accordingly. This is one way in which then you can empower your volunteers. What does that mean? Oftentimes the mark of leadership is not the way in which one person functions and is able to get things done, but rather it's the way in which they seek out the right volunteers for the position, getting the right people on the bus by looking at what are the gifts and skills necessary and connecting those with the appropriate jobs. And then here's the part that's most important, looking at what are the tools that people need for their success. When you go over that job description with a potential person that you seek to involve the role, ask them what they think would bring strengths to the committee. Ask them if they have any other friends who could bring strengths to the committee. They probably have a network of support, maybe even outside of that normal circle. They'll know people perhaps that you don't know who have skills that maybe actually haven't seen in action. Ask them if they need any tools. Ask them what is it that they need in order to be successful. And don't just ask them that once. Ask them that in an ongoing way when you check in. How can I support you in what you are doing? Is there anything I can do to help make this successful? So let's talk about the role of gratitude. Say thank you. Even if a person is asked and they turn you down, they've just given you their time, and that's valuable. And you've learned a little bit more about what makes them tick throughout this process when you've met with them one-on-one to invite them. Be sure to remember it the next time you're looking for a particular talent. Make sure you say thank you in a timely way, in a personal way. Make sure you say thank you in a way that evokes your mission, reminding people why you are engaged in this ministry. Now, you've done the work, you've made the invitations, and people have said yes, and you are excited. What is the first thing you do? The first thing you do is follow up with an introduction to the entire group. Send an email with everyone's contact info, or introduce your two co-chairs at coffee hour. Whatever is your congregation's way of connecting, connection is vital for engagement. Connection is vital for making meaning. Be sure that all your new recruits know how to reach one another. Make sure that they know that they can contact you. We began with talking a bit about the theology behind volunteering. And one of the greats, Henry Nouwen, that the Episcopal Church Foundation likes to focus a lot on, his particular book, The Spirituality of Fundraising. He writes within that book When fundraising is done right, the person asking and the person giving come together to participate in a new thing that God is doing. This is the impact. This is the transformation. And this is why we talk about inviting people into the work. It's hopefully through this invitation and to a greater ministry that you not only encounter a successful pledge campaign, but you also increase your sense of community, engagement, and mission. All right, it is 6:47. I'm going to put up our contact information. If you have any questions that you want to email directly, this is Terry's email. I promise I didn't do that on purpose to just send it to Terry. Now is your time. If you have any questions, we have about 10 minutes. I'd be happy to be of help to you or to ask Terry to also join in to discuss what are you finding in your parish that is a challenge.
And because we were having some background noise and feedback issues, I've muted all your phones. So type your questions into the chat. And if you'd like me to unmute your phone, you can always raise your hand. I apologize, it's sort of an unfriendly thing to do to mute everybody, but we'd love to take questions by the chat function. If you type into the chat any questions you might have about planning for your stewardship or recruiting people to support you. I see a couple of people typing, so we'll wait just a minute to see if we get some questions popped up.
Real quick, while they're typing, I wanted to just say welcome to Barbara Hutchinson. I just saw your name on the invite list. I'm glad that you're participating.
We have multiple people typing. Okay, how often should your stewardship committee membership change, Erin?
That's a great question. So what I would suggest is not think about it in terms of time, but think about it in terms of need and context. What is it that your parish is in need of each year when you're doing your job descriptions and matching it based on skills and abilities? It is very important to have people of experience that can help mentor those along. However, there is no set time that I think is appropriate for us to say, but rather looking at, does your community need someone who is particularly gifted in hospitality, or right now, is this a year where you need to focus more on perhaps some book studies and theology and looking at those various roles? Terry, do you have any more to add to that?
You know, it's interesting, and I think this is one of the values of Erin working together with me, and I always appreciate it because because I'm quite a bit older than Erin. I bring a different perspective and have seen so many cases where one volunteer will take ownership of a particular project and literally keep it for decades.
Yeah.
That I have adopted a policy where where I have the authority to do so, that no one stays in a job more than 5 years. Now they're welcome to come back after rotating off, but we do like to rotate people out after 5 years, sometimes with the understanding that they will be responsible for finding their replacement. That can help someone who's really got a little bit of a tight grip on the reins. That can help them to let go. Then we have a question, any thoughts about the term volunteer? And of course, I'm never short of opinions on that one, but Erin, you may want to take that one too.
So if I recall, the question about volunteer, and to clarify that for the group, was that Glenn raised that unlike in nonprofits where volunteerism is optional, sometimes in parishes the term volunteer is expected. People are expected to fill certain roles and capacities. What I would suggest is that if we view this as a ministry, empowering people to live into that ministry means that the term volunteer can change. It can be co-leaders or co-partners, but I do think that there's a question underneath that question that we should look at. It's not just one of the name, but rather it's, so what is your theology that's really guiding that question? Is it a question of we all have to do this because we're in this together, and if we don't do it, then we're going to have problems? Or is this that this is a ministry that through the process of participating, people can be transformed? In this situation, the process is just as important as the product. Harry?
I think that that's true, and I think that the research you were talking about that indicates that volunteering is good for people's mental and spiritual health indicates that this kind of work is transformational. I'm aware of various positions where people say we don't have volunteers, we have ministers, or we have team leaders, that sort of thing. And what I've found at the grassroots level is that the people who are actually doing the work will still identify themselves as a volunteer because they identify this work as something that they are doing willingly and gladly, and that in many cases they literally volunteered. They came forward first and said they would do it. And they wish to have that honored and respected. They wish to have their time respected, as in they will say to me, after all, I am volunteering. As in, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm doing this out of my affection for the church or the school, whatever entity I've been working with. The other thing is they wish to have their enthusiasm acknowledged. So I think by and large it's a semantic that if you dwell on the semantics, you will be less successful than if you dwell on the impulse underneath that is fueling people's desire to participate in what you're doing. Let's see, we have a couple of people, a lot of people asking about congregations that have professional stewardship development staffers. And I have to say, I attend the cathedral in San Diego, and we do have a professional development volunteer management staff person, but that tends to kick in when the budget is about $800,000 or more. I haven't seen very many small congregations that have staffers who do that. Let me scroll back through here.
There was a question of when do you start recruiting for your volunteers?
Go for it.
What I would suggest doing is now would be a really great time, if you haven't recruited for your volunteers, to do that now. But before you recruit for your volunteers, make sure you have those job descriptions and make sure that you have that infrastructure in place. Spring is a great time to do stewardship education with the entire parish. Summer is wonderful in terms of volunteer recruitment, training folks up. Fall is good for annual giving invitations. And then during what I like to say, the December through April, including Easter, allowing that to be a time of gratitude. Gratitude happens all throughout the year, but using gratitude specifically for stewardship education and volunteer education is very important. What I mean by that, and I want to just give a quick example. So For example, if you had volunteers that donated time for, say, annual giving, why don't you ask them to tally how many hours they spent and then total those number of hours? And what happens if January or February you take a Sunday and say, you know, I just want to take a week and say, either in the bulletin or an announcement, this is how many hours we spent on volunteering for annual giving last year. If we were to total them, this would be the number. And if we were to monetize them, even if you did a minimum wage, although you probably could use a higher multiplier, what would be the amount of in-kind offering that would be? This is a great way of educating your parish about the importance of volunteer time and saying thank you. Okay. Thoughts about an every member canvas. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say we have a question about every member canvas, and then kind of paired with that, Jeffrey has mentioned that his congregation does an email mail initial ask and then a campaign to face-to-face for the laggards. You have any thoughts about that?
I do have a lot. Well, you know, we have, there's a lot of research in the field that says that the best type of contact, if you would like to receive the highest amount of response rate from any type of fundraising initiative, is the one-on-one. So in terms of a response rate by a letter, you can typically expect a 1 to 3% response rate. A one-to-one contact for a nonprofit, Terry, you can correct me, but I believe it's at 20% from, that's right. And then a parish, if it's a parish setting, then it goes all the way up to over 40%. One-on-one invitations are vitally important for success. So I would recommend that you use those in very strategic ways. And every member canvas is very volunteer heavy. It can use up a lot of volunteer hours. So perhaps an every member canvas can be used for accomplishing more than one goal. I've seen an every member canvas used during a time of transition to allow for people to provide feedback to the parish in a time of listening. I've seen an every member canvas used when there was a conflict and people needed an avenue to talk through things. Every member canvas can be very productive, but it cannot be done every year. But Terry might disagree with me. I'm going to...
No, but sometimes you can target the one-on-one visit. Decide
Absolutely.
who really needs that face-to-face time in any given year. One year it might be your laggards. Another year it might be your newcomers if you're growing quickly. Another year, you know, it might be really nice to focus on your long-time, really faithful givers, especially in congregations that are seeing an aging population. I've run into a number of rectors now who said to me that they've fallen off a different kind of financial cliff where all of a sudden their most faithful people have been on fixed income for a very long time, and they're beginning to realize that they're going to live much longer than they had anticipated when they set up their retirement plan. And so they're beginning to be much more careful and having to scale back. And younger members haven't quite gotten up to the same level of giving, and there's some good demographic reasons for that. So they're finding that they're hitting a different kind of financial wall. And to visit those people who've been your longtime faithful members, to thank them for all that they've done, is good financial stewardship, and it's good stewardship of your people's spiritual and emotional commitment. It's a good stewardship of your people, basically. So think about who you want to talk to. Bill Cox has a question about how to get people off the dime in making those one-on-one calls. And what I do is I ask people to commit to come to a training. They don't have to promise me that they will go actually make the ask, but that come to the training, and if they don't feel comfortable afterwards, then they can turn in their cards, no harm, no foul. We don't do guilt in the Episcopal Church. And then everyone who comes to the training, after you've done the training for how to make the call, they come with their calendar and their cell phone, and we say, okay, you've got your 3 or 5 names that you're going to visit. Start now. The first person to get an appointment wins a prize, because the hardest thing is just making that phone call, making that appointment. So you start them right there. You have a little contest, and that gets people off the dime. Yes, somebody's recommending Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, which we often recommend in these webinars by Cliff Christopher. It's right up there with the spirituality of fundraising. I'm noticing that we are now 2 minutes past the hour, so I want to be respectful of people's time. We've been preaching that all night long. If you had a question that we didn't get to, feel free to email me, and I'll either handle it or forward it on to Erin. Thank you all for your time and your patience. Again, my apologies for muting all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight.